Captain's Log Day 283. My spacecraft suffered a serious malfunction whilst travelling between two systems, and I found myself stranded, adrift in the everlasting expanse of space. My best and only option is to wait. As I do, I stare at the great beyond in front of me. I've seen so much and yet so little. The beauty of the universe is so untold, so mysterious to us that I wonder, could you ever truly convey it in any meaningful way?
I have always been fascinated with the concept of space. Yeah, they say that as a kid, you fall into one of those categories like pirate kid or knight kid. You're a princess kid, you're a cars and trains kind of kid. Well, I was definitely a space kid, and I honestly still am. A surefire way to get me interested in a game you're making is to tell me that it takes place on alien worlds or in the vast reaches of space. And I think for people like myself who find ourselves enamored with the great beyond, the most intriguing part is exploring it, seeing what great mysteries lie beyond what we see here on Earth, what adventures we could have if only we could boldly go where no person has gone before. It's an absolutely magical feeling. I honestly find it hard to describe, but when I think of the pure wonder and potential of what might exist in a world that isn't my own, I get slightly overwhelmed by it actually. It's giddy almost. Of course, I'm not going to do that. Some mornings trying to get up before my fourth alarm goes off is hard enough, so space travel really isn't in the cards for me. So the way I and many other people live out their dreams of space exploration is through video games. The thing is though, space is a surprisingly difficult thing to get right in video games. I remember seeing No Man's Sky for the first time and being incredibly excited to set off on a wonderful journey through the cosmos, and was met with a universe that felt oddly shallow. Starfield promised me the interstellar adventure of my dreams, but what came out was a kind of middling stroll through mediocrity, if I'm honest. There are, however, games that did manage to capture the ever so specific magic of space travel for me, the most successful one being Outer Wilds. Now, objectively speaking, Outer Wilds is a much smaller game than No Man's Sky and Starfield. It actually doesn't allow for as much exploration if you're going by pure square mile. Instead, it's a kind of puzzle exploration game with a much smaller, more contained world than No Man's Sky or Starfield's universe-sized sandboxes. And for a long time, I've struggled to put into words exactly why that was. It was a feeling I could very quickly identify when I picked up a game set in space. It would just click, that special feeling. I would know almost instantly if this game was going to give me what I wanted from the experience. I could never really pinpoint why. What separates a story set in space and a story from space? Well, I thought about it a lot. I replayed some of those games and I've come to a conclusion that I think makes sense, so I hope you'll stick around to hear what it is. So, what is the secret to satisfying space exploration in a video game? How do you really capture the definitive feel of an adventure through something as unknown to humanity as space? How do you make a player comprehend the incomprehensible?
Captain's Log Day 285. It's been almost 48 hours since I found myself lost in the stars. It's given me a lot of time to reflect on my journey. Nothing is the same up here. The rules are so different that I struggle to believe what I'm seeing is real a lot of the time. I wish I could write in these words exactly what I feel, but it's an emotion too difficult to explain. Perhaps because humanity simply hasn't found a way yet. With concepts so far beyond our own, it makes sense that the magic I feel from this void is something we just don't have a word for.
No Man's Sky is a game that was deeply flawed when it released back in 2016. It promised a universe-sized sandbox for players to explore that truly reflected the scope of space. What we got was a pretty basic crafting survival game. You mine for resources to make fuel and ship upgrades, You had some extremely limited combat options and a pretty tedious language learning system. Honestly, I don't know if there was much more because I didn't play it at launch. I saw the reviews, I watched the gameplay, and honestly, disappointedly, I chose not to buy it. Now, as anyone who plays the game actively will know, this didn't stay the case. Hello Games, for all their flaws, are some of the most well-intentioned and passionate devs I've ever seen, because since No Man's Sky's release, they set about fixing their mistake and have released 39 updates since the game's launch. And they haven't charged a single penny for any of them either. I haven't played in about a year or so, but last I played, No Man's Sky is now a very enjoyable game, with a lot to do and a lot of fun to be had. The crafting system has been given more meaning, there's base building and expeditions to embark on. It's a fun time with friends, messing around or flying around together, but it's not a space exploration game. It doesn't have that magic. And that sounds weird, right? Because the game's whole hook is space exploration on a realistic scale. But there's something very human about No Man's Sky. I definitely think some elements like the ship designs or some of the alien races you encounter give off the right vibes, but the environments just do not do it for me. This game has incredibly limited environmental variety. There are some weather conditions and they can change up what sort of protection your suit needs, but really it's all just fields and mountains painted different colours. And whilst the crafting and base building is very fun and an entertaining enough system with a friend, it's just not a true space exploration game in my opinion. It doesn't capture the mystery and awe-inspiring beauty of venturing to corners of the universe never before seen because, quite frankly, I have seen all of this before. It's just not extraordinary. And then there's Starfield. Starfield is definitely a game, one that had one of the most divisive launches I've ever seen when it came out. And whilst I didn't personally find the game to be that fun, honestly, it was a perfectly serviceable RPG and I hold no actual hate for it whatsoever, but it's not the overall quality of the game itself that I want to talk about today, so please do bear that in mind. This is a critique on specifically how the game portrays space exploration, and what might shock you is my problem with Starfield isn't the travel itself. I know this was a big problem for a lot of people, so I want to talk about it for a moment. If you're not aware, Starfield isn't a truly open universe game in the same way that No Man's Sky is, or at least the way No Man's Sky pretends it is. See, No Man's Sky has pretty seamless travel between planets, and it does this by masking itself, loading in the planet with your ship entering the atmosphere. And when you do land, you have an entire planet to explore. Starfield doesn't bother with any illusions, and instead just has you select where you want to land on a planet. Some of these spots are specifically crafted locations, and others are randomly generated dungeons, for lack of a better word, with a small explorable outer section and some resources scattered about. It also, to my knowledge, doesn't seem to let you travel between planets either, unless I just didn't get far enough into the game, which is very possible.
I have been adjusting by sleeping and setting an alarm for like every 30 minutes or so. I've seen some people in chat being like, oh, what if it triggers a landing animation? This game cannot do that. Like, that is not possible.
Instead, you once again select this from a menu and you can fly around the planet's orbit a bit, but it doesn't feel like there's much reason to do that, honestly. Now, people absolutely hated this. There was definitely those who defended it, but the big consensus was that for a game about space exploration, you should be able to explore these planets and the space between them fully. Now, on paper, that makes perfect sense to me. In practice, I actually think it has very little to do with making space exploration feel good. Like, would it be nice to have? Yeah, maybe. I don't think it's actually necessary at all, and the menu option does a fine job. No Man's Sky does seamless travel, and I just gave you my thoughts on how that game felt. It didn't really make the experience feel any closer to true space exploration, in my opinion. No, the problem with Starfield is, once again, it doesn't take place in space to me. Not really, anyway. Starfield does not feel like a game that lets me explore space. Starfield is like exploring Earth wrapped in a space skin. There's grey and white bases, grey and white mines, grey and white suits, grey and white planets. It's everywhere. And yes, I'm being hyperbolic, of course. There is greenery and sand sometimes and blue and orange skies, but like, look what happens when you Google Starfield screenshots. This game has a very hyper-realistic style and is clearly a futuristic interpretation of something like NASA, which is fine, and that's very impressive here on Earth in the real world, but that's just it. It all feels so earthly. And yes, I understand that was the creative direction. That was the vision for the game. They wanted to tell a grounded and human story. But there's something so funny to me about people using the term "it's meant to be grounded" when arguing about an RPG set in space. If they wanted to tell a grounded story with human themes and environments, they could have done that on the ground, on Earth. I respect that was the creative decision they went with. It's a valid one. That doesn't mean I have to think it was the right one to go in for a massive space RPG. Anyway, we jump through all these hoops about intent and direction, etc. Just to wind up right back at the core issue for me, we're still just exploring fields and mountains, rocks and factories, areas that, if you change the skybox, would look right at home in any other RPG. And that, in my eyes, is not a good portrayal of space exploration. Is Starfield a good game in its own right? It seemed a perfectly fine RPG from what I played, but like No Man's Sky, it failed at being a space exploration game to me. Earthly locations with human people inhabiting every city I visited. It just didn't scratch that itch. So I've talked a lot about games that don't scratch that itch, but what about games that do? How do you capture a universe so infinite and convey it to a mind so human in a digital world so bound by limits?
Captain's Log Day 288. Waiting for the end is a oddly somber experience. There's the sound of death slowly creeping in, of course, but eventually all you hear is the silence. I think back to the family and friends I left back on Earth. I'll never see their faces again. Leaving them behind was the hardest part about all of this. They were my world, and it seemed so big back then, but now, it all feels so unbelievably small.
Outer Wilds is probably the most emotional experience I've ever had with a game, and it's a game I'll never play again because, quite frankly, it's never going to be as good as it was that first time. There has been a dozen video essays on how incredibly presented this game is in the past, so I wanted to avoid giving it its own video, unless that's something anyone is interested in hearing me gush over. But anyway, I can't not mention it in a video about space exploration in gaming, because this is honestly the only game I've played that truly accomplishes it, in my opinion. For anyone who hasn't played it, first off, you should. I won't be spoiling much here, so definitely give it a go if you can. It was one of those games that, slightly changed my life for a few days, so I'd recommend it to everyone. God, I keep getting distracted by this game. Anyway, for a brief summary, Outer Wilds sees you playing as an alien humanoid character who wakes up at a campfire. It is apparently late for a launch. You stop by a museum and meet your friend, where you encounter a mask from an ancient race of aliens known as the Nomai. The mask does something to the player that causes familiar images to rapidly appear before your eyes. It's very unclear what is happening at this stage, and soon you continue off to the launch and take off in your rusty little bucket ship, looking like something you'd expect a child to play astronaut in. Now, already this game has done a far better job than even No Man's Sky or Starfield, in my opinion. We haven't even seen outer space yet. We've explored a tiny little crevice of a town, and already the atmosphere, the tone is a much better portrayal of space travel here. And that's because of two things: scale and loneliness. Starfield has you begin your journey on a mining expedition. You're walking through this huge facility, just an incredibly big mine shaft made to feel even larger by the very slow speed you're forced to follow at, and the numerous scripted cinematic events that take place. The whole thing lasts about 15 minutes and it ends in a big shootout. It's very grand and cinematic, if not a bit slow. No Man's Sky begins with pretty much nothing. It has as much of an opening as Minecraft does. Your player starts on a massive open planet, stranded, and the grind for materials begins. And these are both completely valid ways to begin your game. They both serve as a great introduction to each game's respective gameplay loop. What they don't do, however, is properly sell the scale of space exploration. When you start in a tiny little town that you can run through pretty quickly, all narrow paths and cliff sides, so small in fact that most of the design is vertical to fit it all in, how even the ship itself barely being big enough for you to fit inside, it really makes space feel absolutely huge once you get up there and start to see just how little of the game the town you're in actually is. And then there's the loneliness. Starfield, I feel like I really don't have to explain too much here. Not only are we surrounded by other workers walking around making the facility feel very active and populated, We're also constantly talked to by our team members throughout the intro sequence. We're then attacked by more people before flying off to fight more people. There's a lot of people. It never feels lonely in Starfield. I'm very aware how close people are and how easy it is to find people when they're not. It's a few button clicks to the nearest city. Now, No Man's Sky is interesting because whilst the game is extremely lacking in meaningful company, what with most aliens you encounter being unable to talk to you until you've learned a lot of language, there's still a lot of these dudes about as space stations, which you'll find yourself using constantly. And because the game has no setup, there's another problem. I can only miss people if I have them to miss in the first place, and due to the abrupt nature of No Man's Sky's opening, I don't. Simple as that. There's no loss of human connection because there's none to begin with. Outer Wilds, however, handles this perfectly. I meet a few people, not too many, just a small town's worth. One of them is seemingly my best friend. They tease me about the launch, talk about how exciting it is, and within 5 minutes, I already feel sad about leaving them behind, and by extension, the little town that they will always be in. And the more you play Outer Wilds, the more you realise you won't be spending much time in that town at all. You're leaving it behind for bigger things. You won't be seeing your friend much anymore. You won't be seeing much of anyone anymore because beyond your homeworld, there are only 3 NPCs across the entire system. And this makes meeting each of them feel beyond comforting. You are so starved for some dialogue, some direction, just some company, that these guys always made me smile. I never wanted to leave them. So when you combine both these things, the scale and the loneliness, going from the quiet glow of a flame on a campfire, enclosed by walls and trees, spending your days in your comfy little town with the people who mean the most to you, going through all of that to the vast expanse of stars and darkness, planets off in the distance, and the ever-daunting presence of the sun shining over you, just you, alone, floating through the cosmos, as the sight of your friends and the town you grew up in becomes a distant speck in your rear camera. That's pretty extreme whiplash. It's almost incomprehensible. I remember feeling very overwhelmed by all of this the first time I played. I panicked, I flailed around a bit, and it took some time before I managed to properly orientate and compose myself. The fun story for you, I actually had my sister play this game, and upon reaching space for the first time, she immediately panicked and got so flustered by the inconceivable surroundings ahead of her that she had to stop playing. I'm not kidding, she just immediately dropped the controller, looked at me and said, "I can't do that. It's too much, it's terrifying." If that doesn't perfectly sum up the difference here, then I don't know what does. This game really sells the scale and loneliness of exploring space, and it does it by handing you comfort on a plate and then smashing that plate to pieces just as you're about to take a bite. But that's not all it takes to make a true space exploration experience. I think there's something that matters even more.
Captain's log, day 289. I grow weaker each day that passes. Food supplies are low and, more importantly, oxygen is running out. It's funny because the one thought that continues to run through my mind is just how amazing everything I've seen has been. How no one else will ever know the universe as I have. I feel so desperately that I have to make people aware. I have to share with them all the mysteries of our reality that I've discovered. Even now, as my energy drains from my body, with no passing ships to be seen in, I fear I might not make it out to tell the tale.
So we've talked about scale and we've talked about loneliness. And whilst those are both incredibly valuable components to making your space feel authentic, I want to go back to that term I kept using when I was talking about No Man's Sky and Starfield: earthly. The environments were earthly. The characters were earthly. The technology was earthly. Well, the one thing Outer Wilds isn't is earthly. And I don't mean the blue aliens you play as or the clearly not Earth-inspired technology systems. Those are nice touches, but they could quite easily fall into the same trap as No Man's Sky and Starfield, as being Earth adjacent. No, what I mean is just how unnatural absolutely everything in this game is. From Giants Deep, the planet that's constantly throwing pieces of land into the air due to rampant tornadoes and worldwide flooding. The Hourglass twin planets, one which slowly drains itself of sand and fills the other up. Brittle Hollow, a planet that slowly crumbles to pieces and allows you to explore all the way to its center. There's Dark Bramble, the imploded remnants of a planet overgrown with space-bending roots that create a twisting and mind-bending maze of never-ending fog. Or the Quantum Moon, a moon that exists in orbit around 6 different astral bodies all at once until it's observed by a conscious observer. Just any of that sounds just insanely difficult to navigate and borderline impossible to understand in the case of bodies like the Quantum Moon, because it is. It is beyond anything you will ever see in an earthly setting. It plays with physics and time and nature in ways that the human brain struggles to understand, making it not only a fantastic puzzle exploration game, but also a fantastic space exploration game. Because space is impossible for humanity to understand. There is nothing familiar about this game. Even the way the Nomai write, the way they've left messages, it's done through these devices you insert into walls, and the sentences form like spirals branching off of one another. It is unlike anything you would ever see in a human environment. It feels distinctly alien to me, and that's how space should feel. It shouldn't make sense to me because I don't live it. If it's not alien to me, then it's not a story from space. It's a story set in space. And if the story isn't from space, have I even really explored it? And this is why I think actually another game that pulls this off really well is Super Mario Galaxy of all things. It opens with this very lively and very grounded intro sequence where you're plopped into the familiar locale of Peach's castle. You're given a very wide, flat area that hammers home the fact you're in a more Earth-adjacent setting filled with toads. There's a conflict with Bowser. It's all very familiar. Then the game suddenly drops you on this tiny planet in the Gateway Galaxy. The game very cleverly centers this planet and surrounds it with endless space. The planet itself is small and quaint. There's no toads in sight. There's limited room to move, yet a never-ending expanse all around you. You feel small, smaller than Mario has ever felt, immediately hitting those notes of scale and loneliness. And Mario as a series is inherently very alien, and so its version of space feels so as well. The game wasn't afraid to throw us abstract, surreal galaxies full of tiny planets with localized gravity, skyboxes that look like you're floating through a void, floating junkyards filled with light blocks that respond to movement. It's surreal and beyond anything you'd ever find on Earth. And funnily enough, connecting Galaxy to this feeling led me to an even bigger realization. One that put into context why, despite the smaller sizes of both, Super Mario Galaxy and especially the Outer Wilds feel so much more like true versions of space than the universe-sized No Man's Sky or the 1,693 planets in Starfield. And as it turns out, the answer's surprisingly simple. It's been staring me in the face all along.
Captain's log, day 2911. It's coming soon. I can feel it now. I don't have long left, but hey, I couldn't ask for a better view, right? I've been thinking a lot about my predicament. The desire to document my journey, all the unexplainable things I've seen, in a way truly does them justice. It's ironic that it was only when I'm so close to the end that I may have found the answer. Maybe no one else needs to understand what I've seen. Maybe no one else should. If something cannot be perceived in its most real form, is it worth perceiving at all?
The question that I set out to answer was, how do you make a player comprehend the incomprehensible? And the answer is, you can't. I should have guessed that really, clue was in the question. But this is exactly why games like Super Mario Galaxy and Outer Wilds succeed, where games like No Man's Sky and Starfield fail. The moment you try to give scale to our universe, our galaxy even, the moment you try to replicate the expanse of a planet similar in size to our own or one of the many others in our galaxy, you have immediately failed to capture what makes space exploration so enticing. Because once it's comprehensible, it's simply not space anymore. To make it digestible is to water it down, is to bring it to a level that not only it can fit on a computer or a disc, but it can be understood and played effectively by the masses. What Super Mario Galaxy and the Outer Wilds tells us is that the most effective way to beat this is to not do it at all. It's why the smaller of these games end up feeling the biggest, the truest representations of space. When the game limits my options like this, the never-ending vast mysteries of space remain just that. mysteries. They give me just enough. They give me beautifully handcrafted, bizarre, unnatural concepts like a moon that exists in 6 places at once until it's perceived, or tubular streams of water floating in the vast vacuum of the universe. Everything else, all the in-between, the galaxies I don't see, they remain a mystery to me. It's all about perspective. Show me the wonders of the universe. Let me discover terrifying alien impossibilities, but don't show me the stretches of rock and grass between them. Don't show me the hundreds of thousands of miles of familiar landscapes and cities exactly like the ones I already have here on Earth. Don't give me such overwhelming access to company that space feels just as populated as the town I live in right now. The universe's true form is incomprehensible, because the sight of it is too much for us to bear. To give us the universe's true form in a way that makes bearing it convenient and familiar is to rob it of all its beauty and wonder.
Captain 3. This will be my final entry. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. But please don't pity me. I lived more in these past 9 months than I have in my entire life. I've seen sights I cannot describe, learned things I still don't understand, met beings beyond my own comprehension, and despite how little I know of all these things, I feel that's enough. The universe is a mind-bending, awe-inspiring, inexplicably terrifying place that can never be captured, not by me or anyone on Earth. And that's okay, because things can be beautiful even if you don't understand them. If what can be explained is as high as our minds take us,
Then there would be nothing left to shoot for.